People have said to me actually that, hey, you're delving into some very interesting material here, so watch out, you don't have any repercussions. And I had sleep paralysis before, I've experienced it years ago, and usually it was something I always fought, but this occasion was completely different. It actually woke me. I've never been awoken by sleep paralysis before, and it alarmed me greatly. And as it began to really take hold and manifest, I kind of began my fight again for control, conscious control. So when this woke me, I began to have an image, a vision of myself, and I had my hair scraped back in a ponytail, and I was wearing dark clothes. I had on a dark jumper, and it looked like it was one of the forces. It was kind of either dark grey, I don't think it was black, possibly dark blue, and it seemed to have the epaulets on and also the arm patches, the elbow patches. And I was in the company of another woman who had blonde hair, also similarly scraped back into. It was the two levels of consciousness. I knew that sleep paralysis was occurring. Then I also was aware that I was seeing this image, this event unfold, and it was very intense, very real and surreal at the same time. And I was very alarmed that my body, it felt like it was being compromised. It felt as if there was an incursion into a field of my general reality. But the fact is, being awoken from a deep sleep by a state of paralysis coming on, I've never known that before. I mean, before, when I've had sleep paralysis, it's been when I've been drifting off. Never, ever, ever have I been woken up by it. So this was rare. So this felt like it was induced, and I was in a state of some alarm because I was aware, safety, flight or fight was beginning to take control. Whilst I was fighting it, I also saw this scenario unfold in which I was with this lady, as I've described, and we'd come to sit at a table, refreshment table. It looked like a kind of bench and table that you have joined, that you see at park benches, maybe something like that. But we were in a very large space, a big area. I could even say it might be like a hangar. It was a big open space. There were no buildings in it. It was a big building, tall ceiling, and it felt like a unit of some kind. We had a paper cup of coffee each. I proceeded to drink mine. I could at best say it was brown, deep brown, and it wasn't a big takeaway coffee cup, not that I could see, not that was visible to me. Anyway, so I drank my coffee, and within moments of drinking it, I began to lose consciousness. I was observing myself losing consciousness. It wasn't an outer body, it was definitely another level of reality, where I was still going through this sleep paralysis. I was really working to keep hold of my sensibilities, and at the same time this scenario was unfolding, but it felt like it was induced, because I wasn't looking down. I was an aspect of consciousness observing myself. That's all I can say. Like a lucid dream in a way, I guess. That's the nearest I could come. And as I began to lose consciousness, and I watched myself begin to slide off this seat, and I looked up in great consternation. I suddenly looked up at my companion and said, "But the coffee." And I looked at her, and she said, in a really cold, very calculated, very discompassionate way, she just said, "I didn't drink the coffee." And I thought, oh my God. And with that, I blacked out. She was a colleague, is some kind of colleague in this. No, not a total stranger. I felt like she was a colleague at work, and I don't know what the work was. I didn't see any detail of her face, so I couldn't say if I saw her again I would recognize her. It was as if I saw her in profile, but it was almost as if she was just a colleague, because we were wearing the same clothing, the same jumpers with the dark grey or blue, which reminded me, I guess, of an Air Force colouring, but it may not be. I really don't know. Could be some other different kind of aspect of the force that we don't know about. I really don't know. To be honest, I haven't done any research on other perhaps covert aspects of forces and what their gear is like. There was just nothing. It was really interesting, but this woman's response to me was shocking to me, because I realised I'd been betrayed in that moment. That was obvious, that she was some kind of other intel working to compromise me for some reason. I don't know what that is. To this day, I don't know what that is. I observed myself going unconscious, hitting the floor, and the next thing I know, I'm coming to, but I'm being bodily carried by 4 people, and the 2 at the top half of my body who are carrying me, they're not carrying me on any kind of a gurney or a stretcher thing, they're just carrying me bodily. They're holding their hands up in front like this, and it's as if to shield 2 hands, one from either side, and it's as if to shield my eyes from some light up above, some big light, big expanse of light. So I don't know whether, I have no idea what that was either. No, not to my knowledge. Not to my knowledge. I didn't feel them grabbing me. It didn't feel, you know, an intensive grapple onto me. They were taking me somewhere, and where that somewhere was, I have no idea. And after I saw the hands in front of my eyes, and they carried on walking me to wherever they did. This place, the same location. It's the nearest thing I can describe it as, or some big warehouse kind of place. You know, it looked like a big industrial unit, stroke hangar, stroke whatever. It was, you know, you couldn't see the ends, like you couldn't see the end walls. You know, it was very big, very long. There were big lights, but there was too much light to see the detail of the light giving off. It was very bright. No, it was electric indoor light, hard light, I would say. There was nothing else around that I could see. To my right, as I was sitting down, I was aware of some structure, such as that it might have been a vending machine. I mean, I really don't know. I didn't coffee or whatever. It might not. I might maybe barking up the wrong tree. It could have been something else entirely, because it was of those proportions that I was sort of aware of, comparable to my height, sitting down, having a coffee. This thing wasn't hugely tall, and it sort of seemed a metal unit to my right. When I came into this scenario, we were at the table, and it was as if we'd just sat down. You know how you get those picnic benches, and they have the sort of seats attached? It seemed like an all-in-one. It felt like a wood. Yes, it looked. Yes, so it wouldn't be a bench, but it would be those. You can get those stools which are attached, you know, still to the table. Because I'm just seeing myself slide down. As I slid down, I didn't have to move my leg, just like a stool, plain stool. And it wasn't a big unit. And the colleague, here am I sitting, and the colleague was here. So I'm here. She had a slim look about her. I really didn't get a good look at her features. What is the voice? It was the tone of the voice that really sort of struck a chord of shock and in a way disbelief. Very discompassionate, cold. But you know, if I was edging toward any accent, I would say there was a slight Eastern European, but I couldn't say for sure. But that's where I would sort of lean to. But it was just this cold, crisp. I didn't drink the coffee, and you know, wow. It was that almost venomous. It was just like we'd arrived and just got the coffees and just sat down. It was like that's the moment we came in on, or I became conscious of. Well, this would have happened somewhere around the 7th of January, which was a weekend, first week of January. At the end of 2011 and just beginning 2012, there was an article done by the Ripley and Tina News, by a guy called Paul Lynch. Nothing nefarious about that, except, you know, that was just 2 or 3. The article came out on the 5th. Here, there's quite a little bit about Ammach, and this was a new departure for this. So that was the only different thing that had happened, but nothing. I actually feel that this was something induced, and you know, maybe if there is another aspect of consciousness that I'm living and working with in another field, as an operative, I don't know. I mean, it all sounds very far-fetched, doesn't it? But the fact is that you don't normally get woken by sleep paralysis. As far as I'm aware, it's normally the other way around, that it's as you're falling into that between, you know, a waking and sleeping state, not being in a deep sleep and then being woken up. I mean, how can that happen? What's got to happen to the brain and the signals to the brain for that to manifest? It's very, very unusual, I can tell you. And I've had lots of paralysis experience, especially in my 20s and 30s. That's pretty much it. You know, when I saw the 2 hands above me taken through this location, that was it. I managed to pull myself fully consciously back into my body, And I was determined to maintain that full consciousness. So, and also what was very interesting, which was not very pleasant, and this isn't unusual, it's the paranormal element. Not that there was anything paranormal going on, except that the room seemed quite alive to an essence of being watched. And I stayed awake most of that night. I sensed I was being observed, monitored, and also it was as if I was trying to be put back to sleep. So whatever this situation was could be then expedited by my being fully unconscious in one aspect of my beingness. This felt more nefarious, and it's very unusual for me to experience that, I have to say. There is a different experience that happened only about 3 or 4 days prior to this. And I don't class this in the same league at all, but it's interesting because it may have set up my mental faculties, whatever that may mean, to allow the next experience, which was the one 3 or 4 days previous to this. So really the beginning of 2012, I was woken in the middle of the night. Again, I've never had this before. I've never been woken from a deep sleep. This time I was awoken by a shock of electricity coming from the top of my head, like the entire crown, not one point, but as if the top of my head had become absolutely connected to the mains. And I really mean it. It was extraordinary. And I saw this mass of white light energy. It was, I mean, I don't know what voltage. It felt like I was plugged into something, and it was vast, and it shocked me, and it shocked me because it was different. It didn't feel nefarious or malicious. It felt like something had suddenly been switched on and had been induced to resonate at the crown chakra. And again, I didn't sleep the rest of that night, and I saw an image the next day. Came out from the back of that was that my head seemed to be buzzing into the lower neck, top of the shoulders, really going down the neck into the shoulders from that experience. But then sitting in traffic the next day, I focused on this because I wanted some more information, because it was so intense, this electrification of my body, that I couldn't perceive anything at the time. But this next day, a few hours later, I saw this solid white structure above my head, placed on a sort of a tetrahedron, but it was actually pure white. It was quite big, but it was also resting on a plinth of white, the same material. It was about that deep. I thought, wow, that's amazing. And as I focused on it and locked into the structure, my whole top of my head and down my neck began to almost physically vibrate with a frequency. And, you know, I know that is maybe something to do with a Merkaba. I don't know whether something was being stimulated to open up other areas. Difficult to tell, because from that, again, so that was that very, very intense experience. Again, I've never had anything like that before. Of course, there was this not so pleasant event about 3 or 4 days later, which was the one I've just described. The next day, just going back to the more nefarious event, I'll call it. So I didn't sleep the rest of that night, and I felt really that I needed to be on guard, really on guard, and I was. And I sat in circle for 5 years at Belgrave Square in London, and I didn't really feel I learnt a huge amount after the first 2 years, but what it did teach me was how to help and rescue people who had been left open or in circumstances that were quite dangerous for them. And also as a therapist, when I trained in incidents where I felt I nearly lost my life to entity incursion of a very extreme nature. And I managed to hold my ground and stay with myself. And so because of those experiences as well, and some others along the way, I really became super on guard. And the next night, I did a little meditation and then put myself in a defensive position. And psychically, I moved forward in my inner vision, stood in my kind of warrior gear, brought all my beings of light and energy and strength to protect me. So it was like I'd got a veritable army beside me. And I just said, no further. This is never happening again, and not without my agreement. And if you need my input again, it is in open, conscious discussion. And because I also became quite outraged. I mean, I regathered myself, my forces, and I thought, how dare they? Into February, and there's been no other incursion so far. But I am more alert, I must say. I'm not sure where this leaves us, whether it's paranormal or something else. Let me tell you about it. On the 16th, which was last night, I was over at Mars doing some work on the presentation at 1 o'clock, and I read for another at least 3/4 of an hour, so it was probably coming up for 2 a.m. when I finally began to fall asleep. As I did, the room changed energy dramatically, and it caused me some concern. I was instantly aware that something was going on, and there was a sense of something around. Now, I was not quite sleeping, but I had my eyes just slightly open, you know, when you look through your eyelashes, and I was aware of seeing a being. Now, this being was very human looking. I would estimate to be about 5'9", possibly 10. They were black, so there were no distinguishing features at all, apart from a head, arms, legs, torso, of course. There was no nose to see, no eyes to see, no other features at all, not even ears, as if it was entirely in some kind of black coverall, covering everything, except I think that wasn't a coverall, but that was a dimensional reflection. Whether this is to do with a MyLabs possibly event, or whether it was another dimensional, somebody projecting into this, because it did feel quite human, and I'm not saying it was, but I don't know what this was. It was very different. So I was aware of this being as I was looking through my eyelashes peer over at me, very close to me, and as he did so, it feels like it was a him, my whole energy field became very charged electrically and was very disconcerting. It was really unpleasant and alarming, and at that I kept very still. For some reason I just felt I needed to, and then the being got up from peering over at me and then stepped toward another room, which was a matter of 3 or 4 steps. So I saw them from the front stand up and from their left side, so I didn't see them from the back because I daren't move. I just stayed. Nothing else happened with that being, but the whole room remained and retained that vibration and frequency of being very unsettled, and I felt like I was being watched. So whether it's a remote viewing scenario or an intel or a psyops thing, who knows. I think this was what I saw as well. In the far corner of the room, a little red dot the size of like a tiddlywink button, something like that. Vaguely aware of that, but I didn't sleep the whole night. Or trying to sleep. It was as if I was very vulnerable, and I didn't. Now in the evening here on the 17th in London, I'm absolutely exhausted. I don't know what that is about. Somebody else may know when they hear about this. That's over and out from me for this little update.
To add an addendum to what you've just heard about the 16th of April 2012 event. Over the intervening time, and in fact relatively close to the time that it happened, I had some more awarenesses of what that event was like. So just to fill in some of the areas that were not mentioned, what seemed to happen, I mentioned the tiddlywink-sized red light. This is an interesting one because there was a camera overlooking the road checking on cars, and that had a very small point of red light. But this red light was about the size of a tiddlywink, which you've seen. And then the room energy changed, and part of the room, a little few feet away from me, seemed to take on a darkness blacker than black. And out of that seemed to pop this man. Now, I know I said I thought he was about 5'9" or 10. I would actually say he was likely more my size. I'm 5'3", perhaps not 5'3", but he may have been maybe 5'6", 7 or 8, somewhere in that region. He was terribly slight. He also had high set shoulders. So I'm pretty sure this was a human being. And what I mean by high set shoulders are those people who sometimes people say they look like they've got a coat hanger stuck up their neck because their shoulders are a bit like that. And it's a natural configuration, how they're born. This person was very slight, very slender, and I think definitely a human being. And I had the feeling of military. I did not get the feeling of ET. I'm not saying it wasn't. I just didn't get that sensing. I didn't say that they walked those few steps to me and leaned over me. And when they leaned over me, I talk about this electrical release of energy, which was intense. And I did feel that throughout my whole body. But then as they got up to, I don't know, it was 2 or 3 seconds or 10 or 12 seconds, and I didn't move my eyes. When he got up, there was like a snapping of an elastic band. That's the best analogy I can give. And that snap also was quite a big electrical hit, for want of a better term. Then they went into the kitchen, which was literally 3 steps away from where they were. And that door was at the bottom of the couch I was sleeping on. This took place downstairs in a living room. Through that kitchen was another very small area, which was an editing suite. That being said, what was also interesting, when people were up, it was about 9 a.m., there was another person in the house up the stairs in their room. And I said, I'm going to see if they heard anything, because nobody had. As I went to go through the door and stood under the doorway, the door jamb, I suddenly was aware of this incredible shower of light, really as if I was standing under a shower of light. It felt protective, felt loving, and really beautiful and almost physical. It almost took my breath away. I obviously didn't mention that on that initial recording of what happened on the 16th of April 2012. It's fascinating, all of these weird things that have happened before and after the beginning of the work that became the Ammach project, now the ET Newsroom. There's not so many strange things happening at the moment, and that's fine by me. I'll keep you posted. I just thought that little update was really important because there's a lot of interesting information there. So much so that one of the guys I interviewed, an ex-special services guy, Stuart Neal, he had been invalided out of his unit because he had managed to come into contact with a bomb, and this had caused some brain injuries. You can see my interview with Stuart Neal. It looks like he's had a terrible stroke, or some other people may think that he looks drunk. Either way, it's a brain injury. He was very kind. He said he and a friend would make themselves my protectors whilst I was doing this work. I couldn't quite imagine how they would do that, but I was very grateful. It's very sweet of them. I didn't take them up on their offer. But what he told me was that part of his job, they were known as the Glimmer Men. And the Glimmer Men, which is why one of the things he thought that I'd seen was a glimmer man. I don't think this was a glimmer man, but what Stuart told me about glimmer men was that they were part of a special unit of the Special Forces. There was a 2-year tour of duty, and they already had some kind of covering or cloak that made them invisible to the normal spectrum of visible light. Their jobs was dirty work by the sounds of it. They would go into people's homes and they would basically take hard drives, laptop work, that kind of thing. And if anybody was there, they could conceal themselves. If they had been seen by the person, they would often, if there was any alcohol around, just stuff alcohol in them or leave them, in a state where they wouldn't remember what they'd seen or thought they'd seen. Anyway, it's intriguing. It is intriguing. It definitely felt like military. And it also put me in mind of Mike Orum's Area 51 experience, where he and his partner were taken, abducted, but by military. So it was a definite My Lab situation there. And the way they did that, they had a portable portal generator. Again, that's something I hadn't come across before. And you can read about Mike Orum's experience in his book, Does It Rain in Other Dimensions? But there we go. That's my bit. Hope you've enjoyed it.
So I want to tell you about a major experience that I had last Thursday, which is the 17th of September. Now, I've always said, as founder of Ammach and all of that, I have never really been prone to paranormal experiences, visions, or anything that a lot of people have. You know, I'm just extraordinarily grounded and anchored in this 3D reality. Now, I have experienced a lot of, especially in the developing years, my younger years, psychic attacks and some extraordinary things in the second year of Ammach that were, very challenging. So apart from that, there's been nothing else except until last Thursday. Now, what was really interesting about this is that I was impressed, let's call it. Another friend might say compelled, because she actually had the same experience, but 14 hours later, in terms of this next little part of the story. And that is that I was impressed to put a candle in each of my rooms, and I have a maisonette, so I have some stairs, and also then to take some incense around the room, and that's sort of reaffirming protection, that only the highest and the best can, enter and interact. Almost as I was going around, it was as if I was not really thinking those intentions, but just kind of knew them. So as if something else was with me, but that was very subtle. So as I'm going up the stairs, about halfway up, I suddenly felt like I'd walked into another energy field, because I felt like 100 eyes watching me. It was really super intense. And then my whole body and physicality went cold from head to foot, but extreme. This isn't just a little chill. This is like somebody had opened a freezer and had walked into it, and accompanied by this tingling. So that kind of stopped me right in my steps there, on my tracks. And then I carried on upstairs and thought, okay, let's kind of observe. Okay, so that was all right. I did feel a bit spooked. And that was it. So I came back down, finished a bit of work, and I probably ended up going to bed about 2, and I was really tired, so I slept quite quickly, only to wake up maybe an hour or 2 later, not anymore, I'm sure, because it was still very dark. I woke up, I was sleeping on my left side, which is turned toward the wall and the window, and all very dark. And I wanted to turn over to my right side. Now, my right side would face the inside of the room then, and the door. Now, I don't normally wake up to turn over, and I couldn't turn over either. Now, in the past, I have been subject to paralysis, this very common thing that people experience, but never anything else. And I'm not a person who can relax, go with it, and perhaps just burst like a bubble out of my body and astral travel. I just can't do it. I have to fight it. I'm just wired that way, and that's that. So anyway, it wasn't paralysis, but it was as if I was kind of bound by some magnetic energy or some field. And my breathing began to change as I began to go into panic mode and fight mode. Slightly. And then I heard myself say, it was my voice inside saying, just let me turn over, please. Now, who was I talking to? I mean, for goodness sake. So with that, I could turn over, and I realized I'd fallen asleep with my laptop by side of my bed, and pretty near my head. Now, I know you shouldn't do all of that stuff, but anyway, I do. Because the power light was pulsing a bit, I went to turn it off, but I was going to take the plug out of the socket, which requires being awake. So I'm now awake. I'm not half asleep. I was when I was turning over, but that kind of experience of the breathing woke me right up. And as I went with the thought of taking the plug out, I suddenly noticed a haze. It's the best description. It wasn't really a light, more like a haze in the middle of the room. And then in this haze was a man. So I reckon he'd probably be about 12 feet away from my bed. And he was, I'd say he was about 5'8", very slender. He was wearing 60s kind of styled outfit. He was wearing dark trousers and a shirt with what we used to call a tank top, that woolen sleeveless top. And he had a dark beard and dark hair. I mean, I would recognize him in the street if I saw him. He was that clear. And he was definitely human. And he just gave he was almost face on to me, not quite, maybe 80% face on to me. And he gave a little wave with his left hand, and like a sort of cheerio or whatever. And I thought, what the hell? And as the what the hell came out of my thoughts, I didn't say it, he disappeared, and in his place, but slightly nearer to me by another 2 or 3 feet, was a being, very tall, maybe 6-7 foot, but 90-degree on to me. So I only saw them in profile, and the head was hunched down, shoulders hunched over. I just was aware of their skinniness and their tallness, and they'd got everything tucked in as if they were making themselves as small as possible to me. But the one thing that they couldn't really make small, and that I had a very good visual on, and this is 3D visioning now, this is not me being half asleep, was their arm. Now, if I just show you, if I have my arm tucked into my side like that, and then I flop my hand over, that's sort of a 90-degree angle. Well, the appendage from their wrist was like a hand, I suppose, was twice the size of mine lengthwise, and also it flexed by about 45 degrees. So I know some double jointed people can get their thumb to touch their arm. I'm not one of those. We have seen it in humans, but this was naturally resting at least 45-degree angle, if not a 40-degree angle, which is very unusual. And it didn't have a hand. It was more like I don't know whether it was pincers or I don't know what that was. But anyway, the head wasn't big that I could tell. I don't know how far it had got its chin tucked down, but it looked sort of a rounded top. So I don't know whether I was clearly looking at some kind of insectoid being. First time in my life, and this was a big surprise and shock. And what was interesting too, this whole event probably lasted no more than 10 seconds, maybe 8, I don't know, something like that. And but there was no fear. Absolutely no fear. It was just as if I was observing. It almost, I could say, looked like I was looking at a hologram. I don't know if I was or not, but the haze screen thing and the human going, and anyway, all of that. And there were no smells, there was no telepathic communication, there was nothing at all. And the creature kind of dissolved and disappeared away along with the haze. And then I unplugged my computer. And I thought, oh my God, shall I put the light on to sleep? Well, I don't sleep well in the light, so I thought, don't be silly, it's gone, go to sleep. So the house the next day was, so just last Friday, was a little bit energetic. So I was still kind of feeling a little bit at 6s and 7s energetically, and thought, oh my God, now I've talked to several people about this, and some people think that it's contact being initiated. And I must say, when I have said, put out for contact, I only want personally diplomatic contact, intermediary contact, humane contact. I don't want to be terrified. I want to understand, and I want to do it educationally. So, I don't want any genetic tissue taken, none of that. It's almost as if, because I was shielded from any fear or anything like that, and I don't feel any fear speaking about it either. The reason I wanted to share this with you is because, A, I don't consider myself an experiencer. Maybe I'm becoming one, I don't know, I'll keep you posted. But also, maybe this is a new phase for humanity in general, because if I'm going through this material manifestation and this doesn't happen to me, generally speaking, then, to me it's like a signal that something may be going on. And someone actually said, well, maybe I'm also going up to another level of development with the steps and the symbology of that. Who knows what? We can read all kinds of things into that. I also heard that there was a massive earthquake in Chile around Wednesday into Thursday, and that in fact the earth was continuing to quake. Now, I haven't followed that up. I don't know if the earth is still continuing to quake, but it was for quite a long time. Now, because this was such a massive earthquake, I just wondered if the mass of the magnetic fields was so displaced, was so disturbed, that allowed, if you like, a window of opportunity for someone to connect with me, the ripple effect of the magnetic energy being impacted. Anyway, that was just what I wanted to say.
Just as an addition to that last piece from the Ammach files that you've just heard, I wanted to tell you about another extraordinary aspect of that, and that is, I already mentioned a little bit of it, and that was that someone I used to know who 14 hours later, when I had told them about what had happened to me the previous night, had said, oh, by the way, the clothes are not 60s, they're from the 70s. I went, oh, how do you know? What makes you say that? And they said, this chap appeared, the one who gave the nice little wave with the hand, who smiled before he dissolved into the smoke. I call him Clive now, so I don't know if Clive will ever turn up again. But the weird thing is that this person doesn't believe in anything. They see ghosts and stuff like that on occasion, not a lot. And this Clive just turned up, not the mantid, if that's what that being was, the mantis, but just Clive. I think it was to get the facts right, that it wasn't 60s gear he was wearing, it was 70s. So there we go. Now look, what all of that means, I don't know, but certainly was corroboration that I had seen something. And it was, that was quite extraordinary, especially as this person did not believe in anything linked with ET at all, really. Very interesting. So I hope you found these little vignettes interesting. I just thought I'd put them together in one place. These are by no means all of them. And in fact, just to end things, on my very first Ammach show, which I think was in the second week of October 2014, I was walking my little doggo, Jack, and just on my way home, I'm always looking at the sky, and I regularly used to see, I'm in near Hastings, and I used to regularly see in part of the sky craft, I think craft going across. I'm sure it's not a satellite, but there were points of light, so nothing stunning or, incredible, but interesting. And then on this one night, the night of my show, I did my show from 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. And I stood there whilst my doggy was just finishing his business about 10 o'clock at night. And I looked up at the Orion's belt and said, oh, come on, guys, really? Can't you just, just give me a sign? Just let me know you're hearing me. Well, with that, the 3-starred Orion's belt began to break up. I know. I mean, really, you had to be there to believe it. So the left-hand point of light, because that's what it looks like, doesn't it? The Orion's belt, points of light, shot off to the left, out of my range of vision. The one in the center shot forward, and then the one on the right went to the right, but stayed within my field of vision. My jaw just dropped. I went, oh, okay then. Thank you. A nice story to tell for the inauguration of my show. So there you go, folks. Let me know what you think. Like, subscribe, and share. And as I said, have you had any such things happen to you? I don't normally, and I still don't consider myself an experiencer, but I do have the t-shirt. Bye.